I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to the next reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Pulse is over. Welcome to the internet. Okay, Andy.
Do you remember those days of when you'd get your internet and it came on a disc and you'd put it in
AOL
and you'd
discs.
install?
Yep. Oh my God. AOL, CompuServe. I had them all.
Quite the flashback with this film.
Totally. Lots of fun sounds in this movie. Internet sounds, nostalgic internet sounds. I love baud tone. If we can have just that is another thing that's really missing in my life is baud tone. Had you seen this one?
I hadn't seen this one before. No, okay. This was one that was new to me. I had seen, as we talked about in our member pre-show chat, we were talking about some other J-horror films, and I had seen Cure, another film that Kurosawa had made that was really creepy, really effective and haunting. Likewise, kind of a slower paced film, but designed to just amp up the tension and the atmosphere. Very creepy film. So I walked into this liking him as a filmmaker already, and I was very curious about it.
Okay, so what'd you think of the movie?
I liked it a lot. This was, it's an interesting one because there are elements to the story that I think if you're looking at it for perhaps logic and trying to figure out the way that things are actually happening, it may not actually make a lot of sense. But I think that's sometimes what works best in horror films, when things just don't make sense, but creepy things are happening anyway, and you can't really do anything about it. And the way that this film played with those elements and the framing, and particularly when other characters are in the distance or toward the back of a room or whatever, like some really haunting imagery. And I think it made for a film that just kind of got under my skin, and to that end worked well, especially because of the themes, which, I don't know, felt more relevant today than probably even in 2001 when the film came out.
Boy, that's the weird thing about it, right? Like that almost is the haunting of that this movie represents, is just how clear it's able to communicate the isolation and loneliness tropes, and what the internet will do ultimately. Right. And it only took 20 years and change for us to realize just how right this movie was in the feel of transcendent loneliness that can be a part of an isolated internet experience, and using technology and alienation, like the internet as a conduit for supernatural forces is interesting to me, and it was matched really by how haunting the practical and I guess probably budgetary constrained production design this movie ended up being, because like those abandoned warehouses are sublime for scary stuff, right? Like they are able to communicate so much with just some charcoal, body shaped charcoal on a wall, and I found myself legit anxious anytime somebody brought out a roll of orange duct tape. I think there's just so much compelling about it. I did say out loud to my wife when I took the headset off and finished the movie, I'm not entirely sure what that was all about. Like, it took rewatching some sequences and doing some serious reading to make sure that I understood who was who, what was what, and what everybody was going on about.
Yeah.
But man, a day later, and this movie is already aged very, very well for me.
Yeah, it was a really the idea of this to take, I mean, within 10 years of when we were all introduced to the World Wide Web, right? I mean, this is 2001, so it's only, 7-ish years old. And to have a story that already is recognizing that people are getting lonelier as these internet connections kind of are created, they're spending less time with actual people. And the way that the film, just even the relationships that it's portraying, you're already getting this sense that these people just don't have real connections. Like, it really stood out to me when, we have this, there's four characters who work at this greenhouse, right? This kind of this place that sells plants and stuff. And one of them is missing. He's missing at work, and so they go. One of the girls goes to his house because they need this disc to get these. I don't know, something like something for their sales reports or so. I don't know what it is, but anyway, they have to go get this disc from his house. They haven't heard from him. She goes over there, and it's creepy as all get out. And anyway, just to focus on my point, he ends up dying, and the next day they're talking about it, like she's taken with the police and questioned and all of this, and then the three of them are sitting at a cafe just kind of talking about it. They don't seem that broken up about it. The guy has some comments that are pretty telling about just how he feels, and how it's like, sometimes I kind of wish I were dead, and hanging yourself seems like an easy way out, and just like some dark thoughts like that. But none of them seem connected. None of them, like the two girls, don't seem concerned that he's saying things like that. It's just like, it just is painting this picture of a world where people are having harder and harder times of actually connecting.
Right. And the movie sort of portrays that with a number of different models. One of them, you've already said, it's like the social construct breakdown, like they're not connected to weighty statements. And then we have this gradual emptying of the streets. Right, that people are just sort of disappearing, and they're found alone, dead, lying down on the street. And then I found an article a little while ago about a woman who died at her desk in a cube farm in a bank, and was found 5 days later after a long weekend dead at her desk. Nobody noticed.
Oh
And
my
I got to thinking,
God.
I wonder, how does this relate to any current trend? Because you hear about all the loneliness going on in
Yeah.
the epidemic of loneliness, not just in Japan, but I see a lot of it in Japan. And so I was just kind of searching, like, how does this relate to this movie? How prescient is this movie? And in 2024, so far, according to the BBC, nearly 40,000 people have died at home alone in Japan. Like, they're just found dead alone in their solo apartments.
Hmm.
That seems, I don't know what they were doing. I don't know. Maybe they loved being alone. But it is a sad statement when you watch a movie like this. It does have a little bit more resonance.
Yeah.
That we were on a path, and the movie is just a little bit, prescient.
Yeah. It's terrifying. We also have another story. So we've got two stories going on. One is the story of the people who work at the plant shop. The other one is a young guy who, I think he's studying economics, and he decides, hey, you know what? I'm going to install this internet thing on my computer. And we watch him go through the process of installing it, and then suddenly it's starting to ask, questions like, do you want to see a ghost?
Yeah.
Wait, where are we going with this?
Always no.
Yeah. And it starts to show him just images of people alone in their rooms and stuff. And he, of course, freaks out and wants, trying to turn it off. And we follow him as he kind of goes to, at his school, he goes to the computer lab to talk to some of the grad students who are studying computers about what's going on. And he ends up kind of talking to this woman, Harwe, who it tries to help him. He shows her what's going on, and of course that ends up sending her down this spiral as she kind of is sucked into this. And it's interesting because she doesn't necessarily, like, when we first meet her, she doesn't seem like she's alone, right? She's helping other students and is very friendly and conversational, but she's the one who is drawn into this, not him, not Kwashima, because, and I don't know, the way that he is portrayed is like, he is less, he doesn't buy into this idea of ghosts. He's very adamantly opposed to, being able to see things like that. And so is it just that he's just so dismissive of it right away? Like, exactly what
But isn't it
happens?
Kwashima at the end in the boat all affected and impacted?
Well, he does. Yeah. He ends up even though he's saying it, because he's kind of our climactic guy. He sees
Yeah.
that ghost come for him, and everything kind of comes into focus, I guess you could say. And he, as much as he's trying to deny it, he does end up having to buy into it. But
Mhm.
through the bulk of the story, like, he's the one who's helping Haraway as she is taken by this thing and left catatonic and everything. Yeah, it's an
What
interesting journey for him.
so the way I'm reading into this is that that the movie's ideology, the movie's worldview, is that loneliness is a contagion, right? And that and that loneliness and being alone are two different things. That you can be alone and feel great, right? And I think Kawashima is an example of that. Through the most of the movie, he's kind of
Right,
an alone guy, but I wouldn't call him a lonely guy necessarily.
right.
Then he gets on the internet, and eventually he succumbs to it. But for most of the movie, he's not. And everybody else that gets attached to it, they tend to have some sort of a partnership with other people in the movie. They are not what we might see outwardly as stereotypically lonely, but they are alone, and or they but they aren't alone, and yet what they experience is by getting sort of aloned upon by the ghost, the lonely ghost, they become catatonic. They become sort of infected
Yeah.
by that same spirit. Is that kind of how you read it?
Well, it is kind of how I read it, but I do think that it's a little perhaps designed to be vague, like intentionally,
Hmm.
because it's not exactly spelled out. Like, I mean, there are people, like, as we find out, Michi, she's our lead character in that other story of the people working
Yeah.
at the greenhouse. She she's trying to call her parents and drives up to see them, and they're gone. You could argue her parents shouldn't have been lonely. I mean, you never know. We can't say. We never meet them as characters in the film. But I do think that it's something that, um, I guess I would just say, latches on to those feelings in people, whether they're necessarily a lonely person or not. And again, that I think that speaks to Kwashima's character, who
Mhm.
by the end of the film, he's the one who's been kind of fighting all of this and has been largely okay. But it's that ghost and that conversation that ghost has with him about, like, I'm all, I can't remember what the ghost says, but it's like, I'm always here, and it's you, you can't stop me. And he even goes to say, you're not here, and he goes up and his hands land firmly on the ghost's shoulders, and so he knows, oh, this thing is actually here, and he can't. And maybe that's the line that
Hmm.
crossed for him, that he has to recognize that this loneliness is actually here.
Yeah, right. We're not going to let you hide from this anymore. Kind of a message.
Yeah, right.
I feel like the other piece that hit me is that we're following young characters, and you're right. We do get a sense that the older adults in Japan are suffering from this too, but it focuses specifically on young adult characters that are experiencing this sort of profound loneliness. And I'm wondering what your take is on that. That we don't get the only older character we get really is the flower shop owner guy,
Yeah, their
who
boss,
he
right.
seems to be doing fine.
Well, he ends up also taping up a room in the
Yeah,
flower
that's
shop,
true.
and
He does. He tapes a room.
so he also goes that path. I think that the idea, well, one, I think you're probably going to get a lot of horror filmmakers who like making films with young people, because I think the audience for horror, there's a lot of young people who really enjoy going to horror. So I think on the outside, looking at the just creation of horror in general, I think that is often going to go into the fact of who they're going to cast for
Right.
horror films.
Yeah.
But I do think in this particular case, the idea of college age students works well, because this was new for all of us when the internet came into being. But I do think that there is an element of young people being a little more open-minded to experiment and play with new sorts of technologies like this. I mean, just look at our kids, and like
Hmm.
they are so fluid on their phones and the electronic devices in their lives, whereas for us it's like something that's taken a little more time to kind of learn and adjust with, because I think they get these things and just aren't necessarily afraid of just making mistakes and screwing something up. They just like go to town and go crazy. And I think we're tapping into that here, where young people are probably more adept at just jumping into these new technologies. At the same time, these are people who are relatively within a few years freshly having left a bubble that they
Mm-hmm.
have always lived in of comfort, parents taking care of them and everything, and now they're on their own, and it's the first time, and it is that pivotal point in your life where you're trying to make those connections and create those bonds and find those networks of your own. And I do think that is part of where we end up here with these people as they're tackling this growing loneliness in their lives.
Yeah, and I mean, just like we were in 1995, right? Like
Yeah.
this was. I kind of think we, like our generation, we are still we're who's represented in this movie, though not Japanese. Like
Yeah.
we're still like first generation. Yes, we got our internet on a disc, or we got our first internet that was just terminal command line and figure out how to, download pictures. And now I found myself a little bit nostalgic for, weirdly, the simplicity of this kind of loneliness in my life when we were in the dorms, trying to figure out what the internet would mean. Um, and I think one of the things that makes this movie horrific is that it truly was not like this yet at that time, right? For those who didn't experience it, like it wasn't this lonely. People weren't disappearing from the streets. It was still very sort of community focused. We had groups, we had humans, and we had the internet. And I think what makes this the sort of existential dread in this movie is that it figured out the fear of meaninglessness in the internet, like the meaninglessness of the struggle to find purpose, that only ends in a program asking you if you want to see a ghost, right? Like they found that 25 years before we knew it was coming.
Yeah.
That's one of the
Right.
things that makes it scary.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's this idea of um, a technology that is offering things that we don't necessarily want to be a part of, and somehow tapping into it. And there's this idea of this afterlife. There's a few conversations in the film that kind of are key to tying all this, trying to tie it all together. And one of them is this idea that, what if all of these ghosts are out there and it's overflowing and they just need a way to come out, and they've just decided that they're going to come out into our world here and kind of take us kind of take over, essentially bring us
Hmm.
to their level or something. And also this idea that I think it was Haraway who was talking about, like the idea of the afterlife, and this idea that how wonderful it could be where you get to actually see all of the people that you knew, and you get to kind of have all of them again, and you get to hang out with everybody again. But then on the flip side, what if that's not true? What if it's just this sense of loneliness and you're completely alone,
Hmm.
and that's all you end up having? And at the end of the film, that's kind of what this final ghost that says to the guy, that like, yeah, that's it. You're going to be alone, and that's pretty horrifying. And it's terrifying the way that you end up leaving things with this film.
How do you think all of this is massaged or molded by the camera, by the look of the film? From let's see, who was it? Junichiro Hayashi.
I mean, it's simple. There's not a lot of movement. I think a lot of the movement is just uh, when it happens, it's pretty slow, pretty gentle. But
Well, this is the thing I wanted to know from you, though. One, there are some sequences where the ghost is approaching a person,
yeah,
and it does the weird body movement thing,
right.
right? Were we still trying to figure out what that body movement was to make ghosts so scary in this movie, or when did that weird ghost creepy crawly shoulder dislocation thing start? Do you know?
I don't know, but I feel like J horror was really playing around with that.
Oh
Like
yeah.
you're getting that through Ringu, Ju-on here. Like you're getting these sorts of movements with these ghost creatures where it's almost well, and you could almost even, and I don't think that they were necessarily pulling from this, but thinking back to like Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula,
Mm-hmm. For
uh,
sure.
where when he shot the three, um, I can't remember the vampire ladies who were trying to seduce Keanu Reeves' character,
Mm-hmm.
there was elements where Coppola wanted to do something different and had them choreograph this whole thing in the bed where they would be able to reverse the film, and that's how
Mm-hmm.
they played it. And so the actresses had to learn their movements all backward. And so when you actually watch it, it just throws you off because they're moving forward, but it all is just slightly off because we're watching it play forward, but in reality they're actually moving backward, and that just throws it off a bit. And I can't help but feel like there was some of that here, and I'm thinking specifically of the one that Yabe ends up getting attacked by. That's like the first
Mm-hmm.
real ghost attack that we see, where he ends up finding the boss's red taped room at the bottom of the greenhouse
Yeah.
and goes into it, and this ghost appears and comes toward him in movements that just don't seem human. And I think a lot of it is just like there was probably some reverse photography and that sort of element that just made it all the more haunting. Likewise, later in the film, there's this element of it's not even like digital fuzz, but it's almost like the image itself is blurred out or smudged in some way, and like there's that I can't remember which character it is, but it's a ghost that is facing away from the character and then it turns around. But the way that it turns to face them, it's almost like it kind of like smudges itself around to kind of face forward.
Yes.
And it's just like I don't know. That one felt maybe like there was some digital work done in it, or perhaps just a kind of a filter put over it to blur it a little. I couldn't tell, but super
Well,
creepy.
well, similar to the you already mentioned the very last ghost approach when it came up
Yeah.
toward Kawashima, when everything's blurred except for, and I thought you were making a joke when you said it, and everything sort of comes into focus,
Yeah,
but
that
it's
was funny.
just the eyeballs.
Yeah,
Oh my
right.
God. That was so creepy. That was a
Yeah.
great, great, great effect. Well used. And I think so much of it where the so much of what the film does well to create this haunting environment is I'll go back to Skinamarink. Like what Skinamarink leans so heavily in is just static shots. And in Skinamarink's case, they're usually tight shots or weird angled shots on things that you normally wouldn't look at. On this, it's like here's a wide shot of a room, and we're not going to move the shot, and you're going to see something in it that's funky and it's going to scare you, or it's going to approach the camera in a way that's unsettling. But we're not going to move the camera because that's so deeply communicates emptiness and isolation. And that coupled with these fantastic choices for location, I think just lend well to Hayashi's ultimate sort of eye for this thing. I think it's really cool. And a lot of stuff shot through other things, right? Through doorways, through
Yeah.
windows, lots of layers. There's one of the greatest sequences I think is when we meet um what's her name in the computer classroom, like the way they use that space with all the computers and just wires hanging to separate physical space is almost as much of a barrier as a wall would be, and yet we can see through it. It's like, but they don't see through it. I think that's
Yeah.
one of the pieces of this movie that I think is really compelling. Is what do our characters notice about the world that they're living in, and
Yeah.
what do they miss that we see? And I think the movie does a really good job at that.
Well, and something else that Kurosawa does here that is incredibly effective is building frames where we don't necessarily catch right away that there actually is another figure in the frame, right? We're looking at a couple characters and then we're like, oh, is that actually, yeah, that is a person back there. And
Hmm.
that's, again, with these static shots where you're just looking, and then your eyes just drift and you go, oh, that's a person back there. Like, I mean, we start right away when Michi goes over to Taguchi's house to find this missing disc, and she's poking around, and he's got this weird, like, kind of translucent shower curtain sort of room partition, which is like, I'm not sure what sort of room decor that is, but it's kind of that translucent hanging into a back room with a window, and we see a figure standing back there, and we're, as the audience, going, oh, is that the ghost? And then she kind of sees it, and finally sees it and goes through and goes, oh, it's Taguchi, and has this conversation, and he seems okay. She doesn't take any stock that he's grabbing a rope out of a box, and he goes into another room, says, yeah, the disc's out there, go find it yourself. And so she does, and then she goes to ask him a question, and of course he's hung himself in a gruesome, horrific fashion. It's just
He
awful
he
to
was
look at.
already dead though, right? Like, she was talking to the
No.
ghost of him, or was he was just affected and hung
Yeah,
himself?
right. And I think
Okay.
that's the thing. Like, some people kill themselves. Like, we see a number of different suicides, but after people have kind of been affected by this ghost and have gone into this catatonia, and then they seem okay. Like, there's this moment where they kind of snap out of it and they seem kind of fine, and then they'll kill themselves, and that's when they turn into the black ash. But then there are also some people like Junko who never quite gets to the point where she kills herself, and so she just like fades off into black ash, and then that was the one time where the ash like blew away essentially. So
I didn't care for that.
it was, yeah,
Because there was some, he was, I don't remember who was in there. Was it
it was
Kawashima? Who was,
Michi was in there with Junko.
right? Micho was in there, and all I could think of was, Michi, hold your damn breath. Like,
Yeah,
you don't want to breathe lonely ash.
so that was interesting. But like those shots of, like, we first see Taguchi, he's that figure standing back there. We see that creepy kid standing in the book stacks at the library. There's the horrific one when Michi, I can't remember at what point this is, but she has just gone to, again, another creepy abandoned factory, and she's walking past a wall, which also happens to have black ash smudges on it. And then as the camera pans, it finds her as she's like looking at her phone or something, and we see a figure standing up on top of this, I don't know, smokestack sort of thing at this factory. She climbs over a ladder and then just jumps off. And after Michi sees her, she jumps off, and we follow her
Rough
as
choice.
her body,
Yeah.
as her body falls and hits the ground. And like, so these figures that pop up in the back are incredibly haunting. And I think that's one of those things that you find in some of these J-horror films that work exceptionally well. And it just is very off-putting.
Yeah, that's what we call it. It's off-putting. Oh my God. So you throw around Kurosawa's name like you know him personally. What do I need to know about him as a director?
I have only seen one other film by him, and I mentioned it. It was Cure, which is a really creepy film. He is another of these filmmakers. I think he started out as a film critic for a while, and then started making his own films. And I don't know. I mean, certainly somebody who is kind of like still working. A new film called Cloud that came out in 2024. I just haven't seen a whole lot, but definitely somebody who I enjoy the tone of his films and the way that he crafts his stories.
Yeah, I don't feel like I can, like we can make any sort of directorial fingerprint statements, but I'm really interested in how this movie that could have been much more overtly gruesome ended up being really, I think, tastefully sedate and restrained. And I think that makes it more existentially terrifying than just, horrific. And I think it's a matter, to me, it's a matter of just his taste. But I'm curious to see, how that expands more broadly to his collection.
Well, and he is a filmmaker who has actually said, like, he's trying to do different types of films. Like, he doesn't necessarily want to have his directorial style locked in. There's a quote from him: "The next thing I want to do is something I have never done." So I think he's always looking for new things. I mean, people talk about like Stanley Kubrick, Tarkovsky as um, directors who they kind of compare him with as
Hmm.
far as style and everything. But he also has talked about how Hitchcock and Ozu really kind of contribute to what he's doing. And so maybe I just need to see more of his films, because with Cure and Pulse, they seem very similar. So I'm
Hmm.
curious, if I go through his filmography, do I get a different sense from him as far as what he's doing?
Yeah. What else you got on this movie? What else is on your list?
I let's see what else is on my list. We talked about I'm always curious with this as a storytelling style, but this is a film that has it starts on the ship, right? We have this ship captain come down, and we see this woman standing looking out at sea, and we realize in pretty short order that this is our protagonist. And then we get the flashback, and we get the whole setup to the story as she's, trying to figure out what's going on. And then, of course, by the time we get to the end, getting onto this ship, and we have the final bit on the ship. She goes into the room to see her friend Kawashima, who they have now, these two storylines have crossed, and now she and Kawashima are on this ship. And of course, that's when Kawashima also disappears. And so we're at this point where we've got, I guess it's kind of, it's not completely a wraparound story, but it's certainly a story that starts on the ship, flashes back to fill us all in, and then ends on the ship. How does that work? Did you need to start on the ship? What did you think?
I didn't. I don't. I'm not sure it was all that effective for me. I get sort of the instinct to do it, and I like the way it was portrayed. Like we have that high shot from way up in the sky, looking down at this boat on the ocean, and I thought that was really cool. Did I need to open with that and close it? Did I need the framing device? I don't think so. I think starting with sort of a subdued, you know, um, just sort of life in motion would have been fine for me, and ending on the boat is still great. I like the fact that she ended up on the boat, but it feels a little bit overwrought to make that framing element, you know, have that framing element in the first place. Was it something of power for you?
No, I also when I realized we start on the boat, and I'm kind of getting a sense, and then we come back and we find her in town. I'm like, oh, is that the future? We're kind of we'll get to a point where she's on a boat.
Hmm.
I just don't know what that gave to us to have it start that way. Like, it didn't seem necessary. I felt like the same, that by the time I got to the end, I'm like, okay, so they're on the boat, and yeah, it was fine. I just didn't feel like we needed it that way.
Yeah.
So it was one of those where I questioned, I'm like, what is the benefit of starting that way?
Yeah. I still, having seen the movie, I can't answer that. I don't understand what the purpose was.
Yeah. Yeah. Likewise, the other question I had about that, as far as the boat and everything, it's interesting because we kind of get this sense from the captain that they're heading to Latin America, and that this is a global pandemic of sorts. This isn't just something that's just happening in Japan, but it's
Hmm.
happening around the world. How does this fall for you in the scope of pandemic films? Did it feel like you were watching a pandemic film?
That's a really interesting question. I Until you said the word pandemic, like, and realized that this is, oh right, it's not so much a ghost loneliness story. They're trying to make it a pandemic. Uh, yeah, I don't. I guess I thought it was fine. It's a little bit hat on a hat if we now make it a disease film. Loneliness is a disease. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
like there's so much about this movie, in the core of this movie, that what makes it scary is that we're ultimately scared of ourselves, and our place in the world, and I really like that. And I wonder if, once it becomes a disease film, that we're othering the experience to the point that it distracts or detracts from the fear of self that I think makes the movie important to me.
Yeah, I think there's an element. I mean, I like the idea that it's, in a sense, talking about how this isn't just something in Japan, but everyone around the world is dealing with this internet thing. It's the world wide
Yeah.
web, not the
Right.
Japanese wide web. And we're all potentially affected by this thing. And so I liked that element of it. I do also think, like, well, I don't know if it works quite in that vein of turning into something that is like this pandemic. Like, is Latin America safe? Can we get to Latin America? You know, like that
Hmm.
element of it. I wasn't quite sure if it completely worked, but like, it seems like the only way to really survive this sort of thing is just to remove technologies from your life and just kind of go back to caveman sort of living, you know, or not
I mean, do we have
caveman,
to
but
go all the way back to
I know
caves?
I went back a little far. That was a bit of a
I
step.
mean, 1984 was a good year for me, man.
Yeah,
uh,
all right, fine. But I think that's the thing. And it's like, I guess that's what it's saying. Or just finding ways to create community again. Like, that's something that I'd be curious to see, like, if it addressed a way where people were actually creating communities with or without technology, is that still something that could
mhm.
somehow find a way to bypass the ghosts?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing that in addition to loneliness, there's so much about, you know, when he puts in the disc and it says "Welcome to the internet." Have what does he say? Have a good time. He says have fun. He says,
Yeah.
"Okay, I'll have fun." Like that entire vibe is, I don't know what's going to come next.
Yeah.
And that the movie's about the fear of the unknown and the fear of what hath we wrought, and people are turning into chalk dust as a result of it.
Yeah.
And I don't need the movie to be bigger than the personal experience of that. Is this one of those movies that was remade?
Oh yes, we'll talk about that for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I feel like maybe that's where, like, telling more personal stories from other places in the world or other places in Japan, that might communicate just enough. But I think I'm putting my finger on what I don't love about it, is the fact that we are trying to find safe harbor and making this a essentially like a zombie escape film or a disease escape film. Um, because I think ultimately what is most important about this is that you can't escape it. There's
Yeah.
going to be no answer.
But I think we get that. Like, I do think that it gives us that because, I mean, you know, Kawashima on the ship, he also ends up disappearing. And I feel like,
Yeah.
I don't know, I guess I didn't necessarily, I don't think that, I mean, talking, you know, this whole thing about the pandemic and stuff, I don't necessarily think it pushed too hard down that road to the point where it really became another sort of disease escape sort of film. Like, I don't think it
Mhm.
was there, but I do think that you could see a potential for that direction with it, you
Yeah.
know?
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
I just had one other thing I have to call out, going back to the way that it looked. There were a couple shots of characters on like riding a bus, and then we had a shot also, or a scene where two of our characters were riding on a train. There was something about, particularly the bus scenes were filmed that seemed so artificial, like it just seemed disconnected from the environment. It looked like a bus with a 50s rear screen projection of like the city moving behind them. It just felt so artificial. And even when they were on the train, there was something about just the way that it was moving that just never felt like it was actually a real train. And I can't help but feel like that idea of those spaces feeling like artifice just somehow worked for me in creating this haunting vibe of
Yeah.
this space, you know?
That's what I was thinking. Is it budget? Is it intentional? Is it both?
Yeah.
Either way, yeah, I agree. There is a mood that comes from those, and I think we get the same thing with some of the effects that they use with the tape on TV, right? When we get those
Oh,
shots of the
yeah.
TV and TV starts slowing down and split framing, and it gives you that same kind of unreal vibe.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, it's creepy. Like there's the one where Kwashima is watching it. It's like a guy walking across a room, and the guy is like glitching out and disappearing, and then appearing again a few steps farther. And but it's just like it was just haunting the way that it all kind of unfolded, and that also kind of tapped into how the ghosts were appearing. You know, they had that same sense of just disconnect with the space they were in when we did have the ghosts show up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's good
Creepy.
stuff.
Very creepy. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, we'll be right back, but first, our credits.
The Next Reel is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson, music by Frank Schlimbach, Francesco D'Andrea, Flint, Oriel Novella, and Eli Catlin. Andy usually finds all the stats for the awards and numbers at the-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.
This is me, huh?
Sure.
Okay. In a world where technology's cold embrace threatens to isolate us, a specter looms in the digital realm. It seeps through the cracks of our screens, whispering promises of connection, only to leave us more alone than ever. This is the haunting tale of social media, a landscape littered with the ghosts of missed opportunities and superficial interactions. But amidst this bleak landscape, a flicker of hope emerges, a sanctuary for those who yearn to connect over a shared passion, the love of cinema. Letterboxd, a platform that dares to defy the isolating forces of the internet, beckons to weary souls seeking true companionship. At first glance, Letterboxd might appear to be just another social media phantom, luring unsuspecting users into its depths. But as you venture further, you realize that this is no ordinary haunting. The spirits that dwell here are kindred spirits, united by their love for the silver screen. In this digital realm, the ghosts of loneliness and disconnection are banished by the warmth of genuine interaction. Film lovers from all walks of life gather to share their thoughts, debates, and recommendations. The isolation that once plagued us melts away as we forge connections through the movies that move us. But beware, for not all is as it seems. The true power of Letterboxd lies in its ability to transform the haunting experience of social media into a joyful haunt. With a Letterboxd membership, you gain access to a world where the specters of ads and limitations are cast out, replaced by an enhanced experience that allows you to fully immerse yourself in the community. As a member, you become part of a select group of individuals who have dared to embrace the haunting beauty of Letterboxd. You unlock personal stats, the ability to track your film collection, and the power to customize your profile like never before. The ghosts of anonymity are banished, and you become a true presence in this cinematic sanctuary. And now, dear listener, The Next Reel offers you a chance to join this haunting tale. By visiting thenextreel.com/letterboxd, you can claim a 20% discount on your Letterboxd membership, and it works for renewals as well. It's an invitation to step into this ghostly realm and discover that, perhaps, the true horror lies not in the technology that connects us, but in the missed opportunities to forge genuine bonds through our shared love of film. So dare to embrace the haunting allure of Letterboxd. Join us in this ghostly sanctuary where the specters of isolation are banished and the spirits of cinema reign supreme. Together we can transform the haunting experience of social media into a joyful celebration of the art form we cherish. Visit thenextreel.com/letterboxd, claim your discount, and become part of this haunting tale. Because in the end, it's not the technology that defines us, but the connections we make through the stories we share. Letterboxd awaits, ready to welcome you into its ghostly embrace.
Boo. So ghostly. Outstanding. All right. What comes next? Oh, sequels. Andy, Pulse, the remakes. Were there 500 of them?
Not 500, but there was, of course, a U.S. remake, 2006, produced by Joel Soisson. IMDb rating on this one, 4.7. Just for comparison's sake, the film we just talked about, 6.5.
Outstanding. Okay.
So, yeah. Kurosawa did a novelization himself of his own script. And then in 2008, we had the straight-to-DVD sequel, Pulse 2 Afterlife. This one was directed by Joel Soisson, IMDb rating 3.4. And then also, same year, another straight-to-DVD sequel, Pulse 3 Invasion, also directed by Joel Soisson, IMDb 3.7. So some pretty terrible DVD, straight to DVD sequels and the US remake. And I remember the remake coming out, and it had like some pretty people at the time where you were like, okay, I've heard of those actors before, like Kristen Bell, Ian Somerhalder, Christina Milian, and so I'm like, okay, I've heard of them, but I've heard nothing good about the actual movie.
All right. I'm not going to watch it.
I was tempted. I was like, I think I'll watch Pulse and its remake. And then I read about the remake. I'm like, yeah, no, I think Pulse is fine. I think Pulse is just fine. I don't need to see the remake.
How about an award season? 6.5. That's got to guarantee it got some love.
It got some love, not a ton. It had 2 wins with 3 other nominations. This film did play at Cannes in the Uncertain Regard category, but it lost to Boyhood Loves. At the Sitges Catalonian International Film Festival, it won the José Luis Guarner Critics Award. It was nominated for Best Film, but lost to Pitov's Vidok. And at the Japanese Professional Movie Awards, Kumiko Aso won Best Actress. And one of ours that we've talked about before on the show, the Fangoria Chainsaw Awards. It was nominated for Most Disturbing Import, which is their category name for Best Foreign Film, but lost to Calvaire. Have you seen Calvaire?
No, I haven't. I haven't seen it. Never even heard of it. But it also sounds like a disturbing import.
Yeah, this one, it's, I think, French. A few days before Christmas, traveling entertainer Mark Stevens is stuck at nightfall in a remote wood in the swampy Haute-Fagnes region of Liege when his van breaks down. An odd chap who's looking for a lost dog then leads Mark to a shuttered inn.
Oh, is that the scary part? Probably
when it gets to the
it happens at the shuttered inn.
Yeah,
everything happens in a shuttered inn. Okay. All right. Well, at least it was noticed. It was not forgotten.
No.
And that brings us to the box office. How did it do at the box office?
Well, like last week, this one was difficult to find much in the way of financials. This film released February 3rd, 2001 in Japan, and then didn't get a US release until November 9th, 2005, opposite Derailed, Mathura, and the limited release of Pride and Prejudice. It looks like it did earn $49,000 domestically and $231,000 during its Hong Kong release, which is $501,000 in today's dollars. I didn't have anything from Japan, though, so I don't know how it did there. I'm assuming it did fine. That's all I could find, unfortunately. So while it may not have been enough to earn its money back on its initial release, it is possible that its cult status may have gotten it there. But again, no information from Japan. I'd like to think it did well there.
You think they're hiding there? I think they're hiding the box office dollars. They just don't want you to know. Does it ever feel personal like that to you sometimes?
Yeah. Anyone but Andy can see this.
ABA. ABA. All right.
I will say with this film, one of the posters of it, it's such a terrible, misleading poster. It's like a computer screen. It's got the red tape around the poster and everything, but it has like a person trapped inside a computer screen image. And I don't like that because it doesn't sell it well. It's like the sort of movie poster that it's just like you see the movie and you're like, well, that poster was nonsense.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up later. I think that's with her, like, looks like she's trying to get out of the computer screen. Like that whole reaching hand thing. That's nowhere close. That's just a real misalignment. It's somebody who had a list of posters to design and hadn't seen any of the movies that they were designing for, just like log lines, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, not great.
No, terrible. Oh, well. But the movie's great. I really enjoyed it. This was a film that has a lot of moments that are going to stick with me.
Me too. It was fun.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Well, we'll be right back for our ratings, but first, here's the trailer for next week's movie, Babak Anvari's 2016 Iranian ghost story, Under the Shadow.
Iranian ghost story? Is that iHorror?
If there's enough of it, sure.
Okay, here we go. It's me, right? My turn? All right.
All you.
Another Friday night. Another bowl of ramen. Another deep dive into Japanese horror with a side of existential dread. But who can you talk to about the subtle brilliance of the cinematography, the symbolism of the abandonment as it relates to your own brewing despair? Your cat? Please. He's practically a ghost himself. Are you cripplingly lonely? Do you spend more time with fictional characters than actual humans? Do you find yourself quoting obscure Japanese horror films to bewildered grocery store clerks? Quote alone no more. There's a better way. It's the Next Reel family of film podcasts. Confetti, dancing partners, awooga eyes. For just $5 a month or $55 a year, you can escape the existential void with bonus content to every one of our episodes almost, but not quite. Early access to those same episodes, ad-free listening, a standing invitation to our live stream chats, and access to our super secret Discord channels. People understand you here. They appreciate your in-depth analysis of cinematic use of negative space. You're home. Join the Next Reel family of film podcasts because eternal loneliness is so last century. Visit thenextreel.com/join and sign up today. Because here at the Next Reel's family of film podcasts, we're not your family, but we might just be close enough.
I like it. Yeah, that should be on our shirt.
Which one? We're not your family, but we're close enough.
Might just be close enough.
Okay. Next is Letterboxd, Andy. Here we are. It's Letterboxd time. What do you? I mean, we liked this movie. We share a like of this movie. What does that mean to this review?
This was one that I just found very effective. I don't think I liked it as much as Cure. I have to go look now and see what I rated Cure when I watched that, because I really liked Cure. I think I rated Cure 4.5 stars, and I think this one I am good with 4 stars and a heart, and definitely one that I'll think about and return to.
Yeah, that's where I'm landing too. Does it change the way I live my life? No, but was it a good haunty spooky fest? Yeah, it was good. I liked it.
Yeah, good stuff.
And I like that it didn't lean in to the horror so much, to the gruesome stuff so much. This movie knew where its guardrails were. Just wanted to say that. Important. Movie knows its own guardrails.
Yeah. But it allows for terrifying moments, like when Yobe is hiding behind the couch and then that creepy ghost crawls over the couch
fingers,
toward him, right?
Yeah. Scary Japanese hands.
Yeah. So creepy.
That's also the name of my band.
I thought it was going to be Lonely. What was it? Lonely Dust?
No.
Breathing Lonely Dust.
What was it? Lonely Ghost Ash?
Lonely Ash.
Lonely Ash. Yeah. Right.
All right. Well, you can. That'll average out to 4 stars and a heart over on our Letterboxd account, which is the Next Reel, and you can find me there at Soda Creek Film. You can find Pete there at Pete Wright. So, what did you think about Pulse? We would love to hear your thoughts. Hop into the Show Talk channel over in our Discord community, where we will be talking about the movie this week.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Letterboxd giveth, Andrew.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
I'm gonna go first because it's really short and it doesn't really directly relate to the movie, but I think it's something that we can embrace. This is a 4.5 star and a heart by Might Be McQuaid, and it just says, "I love being wrong about movies on second viewing." Pretty good. That's pretty good.
I've been known to fall into that camp myself. Yep.
All right, what do you got?
I've got a 4.5 star and a heart by Wesley R. Ball, who has this to say, and also rated it 89. It includes the number ranking, 89 out of 100. Finally, a horror movie that makes me confront my deepest fear: the Windows 98 interface.
Yes. Oh my god. Yeah. I'd be hard pressed to bracket 3.0, 3.1, 95, 98, 2000. Like what they all are cursed in their own special way.
Well, you were off of it by the time whatever it was that came out around 2010. Like that was
Oh, no, I was off of it see,
Yeah,
because I was still working on it at work through
yeah,
2006, but I had purchased my first Mac in 2002, and that
yeah.
was when I did the commercial and had a child. All of those
Right.
things line up. But I had gotten through 2000 XP. The first one I didn't use as a daily driver was, I think, Windows. Was there a 10 or 11? Which was the
10.
yeah
10 was
10?
98. Me was terrible.
Oh no, yeah,
Me.
no, no. You know what? I
Oh,
didn't
I've
use me because
oh,
I was always no. Who would
Windows
use
Me.
me?
Me was so
Windows Me
bad.
was like your mom's Windows.
2000 was great, and anyone who switched off 2000 into Me was realized how bad it
Yeah,
was,
it
and
was
immediately
upsetting.
went back to 2000.
Was me? You probably know this. Windows Bob. Do you remember Windows Bob?
No,
Windows.
is that a thing?
Yeah, yeah. Of course, I don't make stuff up. Microsoft. It was not Windows Bob. It was Microsoft Bob, and it was supposed to be the even more user friendly than 3.195 and NT, and it got rid of the Windows Program Manager. So it was like I just remember it because you'd log in and you were sitting by a fireplace. It was a picture of like a Barca lounger and an end table and a fireplace and built-in bookshelves, and it was like homey, and there was a dog, and the dog was like asking you was like Clippy. It was like the upgrade to Clippy. It was the dog sitting there and you would talk to the dog. And that was like, oh, Rover is the character. There it is.
Yeah.
The assistant was Rover.
Wow.
I did not care for Microsoft Bob, although I remember having a conversation with my dad. Should I upgrade to Bob? And he should not, and he did not,
Yeah.
because it was a downgrade and it didn't last very long.
Yeah. There were some rough years with
Yeah,
Windows. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm glad to
You
have
try, yes, you
left
try
that.
stuff,
Yeah.
Microsoft. Sure,
Yeah.
you do.
Yes.
I just
As we
got
all do.
so worked up, I spit on my own computer. Okay. Okay.
Did I say your line?
Oh, thanks, Letterboxd. All that stays in.
all that Windows talk. Yeah, that was good stuff. Oh my God. All right.